somehow we are trying to recreate this rite of passage. And that's why I feel that particularly this psytrance scene, no, and I don't know, Boom Festival and these kind of festivals, they are in a way new or a modern rite of passage. Psychedelics have been labeled in many ways. No, you can label them as medicines, as drugs, or whatever. No, and we can think that they are potentially beneficial for depression, for PTSD. But what we are sure that psychedelics are catalysts of change. People that take psychedelics, most of the times you do not remain the same. No, that stirs something inside of us, and there's usually a before and after these kind of experiences. A lot of people feel that the initiation that they had was maybe when they were at Woodstock, or nowadays when they go to these kind of festivals, or they have a ceremony and they discover these non-ordinary realities. So psychedelics definitely are catalysts for change.
So welcome to the show, Mark. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Emer.
So you've recently written a very important book, Psychedelic Integration, Psychotherapy for Non-Ordinary States of Consciousness. I just want to show for anyone who might be watching this on video, the very nice cover. So yeah, I'm very excited to pick your brain about all sorts of things today. But just to start us off, could you just give us a brief background on yourself and how you became interested in this field?
Well, my original background is in telecommunication engineering. So when I went first to university, I studied to become an engineer, and that's what happened. But throughout that time, when I was in engineering school, I already discovered psychedelics and holotropic breathwork, and that made an impression on me, and that got my interest. And I was reading and deepening into this field, and somehow I was finding that inspiring. And it was always in my mind that that was a field or a career that I might be interested in pursuing. So when I finished engineering, worked for a couple of years as an engineer, then somehow it was clear for me that I was never going to be a very passionate engineer because my passion was somewhere else. So I decided to go back to university and get a degree in psychology, and then train in different modalities of psychedelic therapy and holotropic breathwork. And then eventually finishing my degree, starting to practice as a psychotherapist, and progressively finding a way into the psychedelic community and the psychedelic field, which was a long run. It took me, it's been like 2 decades since I was first interested in these substances and this modality of therapy. And it's taken me some good 15 years to somehow start to be part of officially this community, and work as a psychedelic therapist in clinical trials and so on.
So could you just describe for us briefly what it is that you mean by integration in terms of psychedelic integration?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it doesn't have an easy answer. The most simple way to define integration would be what happens after a psychedelic experience. So traditionally it's understood that there's 3 big moments in experience in non-ordinary states. That's the preparation of the experience itself, and the integration of the experience. Yeah, I think that this model, the first person that somehow framed it like this was Stan Grof, although there were many other people before him that had talked already of something in these lines. But yeah, so the easiest way to describe psychedelic integration or integration is everything that happens when the experience is starting to finish and after, which sometimes might be nothing. Some people don't do anything after a psychedelic experience. That would be also some sort of integration or no integration. Then if we want to deepen more into actually which practices, which techniques are used in integration, that's another whole story. And then many practitioners might have different modalities, different tools, different ways of approaching integration. And one of the reasons of writing this book has been to, first of all, try to understand how many different modalities are there and have been throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s when we were first doing psychedelic research, and also to describe my own modality of doing psychedelic integration, which is mostly focused on people that have had difficult experiences. So it would be an integration oriented towards people that somehow they feel that they've suffered some negative effects because of a certain experience.
Great, thank you for that. So I'm interested as well. Obviously, the field of psychedelic medicine and integration is a very new field, but I'm interested if you could talk us through a little bit about the historic use of altered states for healing.
I think that actually, when we think about the first medical school, probably that's shamanism. No, so the first attempts or the first way that mankind had to try to heal and to address suffering was through shamanic practices, also with the use of plants that we had available. No? Some of these plants would have a very clear effect on pain, or they would induce visions, or they would induce nausea, purging. Yes, so somehow the early practices that mankind developed to heal were focused on or involved some sort of entering a non-ordinary state of consciousness. Sometimes the shaman would go into a trance, or they would use psychedelic plants, or they would do certain drumming practices to go into this spirit world, and that was understood to have some sort of effect on the health of the client. Yeah, that could have an impact on the well-being of the person. So somehow the use of non-ordinary states has been a common denominator in both healing practices and also religious practices, or like the oracles, no, like trying to foresee the future. So there's been a use of the non-ordinary states throughout the whole history of mankind. Yeah, also through dreams that in many civilizations they were in high esteem. No? Dreams would be something to pay attention to. Yeah. And then our industrial society somehow forgot a little bit about these practices of non-ordinary states of consciousness. It was okay to read about non-ordinary states of consciousness. So for example, if Moses saw the burning bush on the mount, or I don't know, the prophets had some sort of visionary experience in the desert, or Jesus was 40 days in the desert and the devil confronted him and they had a conversation with Satan and all that. It was okay to read about this, but then it was not okay to try to have these experiences ourselves. You know? So we detached from these kind of experiences. And then when the 40s and 50s of the last century came, then we rediscovered that there were substances that they were inducing some spectacular effects on the mind. You know? Mescaline was maybe the first substance that was researched. Then it came LSD, and that created a big revolution in psychiatry. All of a sudden, there were chemical molecules that could be administered in known dosages, and they would produce certain effects. No? So something that science could understand and try to control. And then we started becoming more interested in how can we use these substances. Yeah. Of course, that, for example, Native Americans, they had been using mescaline in the form of peyote and San Pedro for centuries, no? But for us, the white men, that was something somehow new, no? Like, okay, how can we find therapeutic applications for that? And then in that time, then we started developing certain practices. Most of the psychiatrists back then, they were psychoanalysts or trained in some sort of analytical psychology. So psychedelics were understood as tools that could increase the amount of unconscious information that the client could produce, therefore increasing the speed of the psychoanalysis, no? Because there would be more material available. So that's how we started getting in touch again with the potential of the non-ordinary states for healing, which then it has evolved in many different ways. And we have now different schools again in Western society that use non-ordinary states with the aim of healing and learning and spiritual growth. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah, you mentioned about obviously the indigenous applications of psychedelics have been happening for quite some time. And then when we kind of look at that alongside psychedelic medicine, obviously it's a very different way of approaching it. What are your thoughts then on, I suppose, the indigenous worldview and their application of psychedelics versus the new emerging field of Western science? Or not emerging field of Western science, Western application of psychedelics, let's say.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that we still don't have a good answer for that. Yeah, on the one hand, it's true that native and indigenous peoples have been using psychedelic plants or mind-altering substances in a certain way. But even giving the name of psychedelic plants to the way that they were using these plants is like a bias, no? It's a Western bias, because these peoples, they would not consider these plants psychedelic. They would consider them something else, no? Maybe there was a spirit in them that maybe was, I don't know, the incarnation of certain god, or it was a door towards certain spiritual realms, but they would not understand them as psychedelics in the sense that they reveal the content of the mind. They were something beyond it, no? So sometimes when we, from the Western perspectives, look into shamanic practices, we bring a certain bias as well, and then we try to understand those practices through our Western lens, which I think it's not so easy, to do. And that's why when we Westerners go to be part of these shamanic practices in the Amazon or in other places, it's very difficult to really tune in their worldview. Yeah, it's almost like there needs to be a certain translation of ontological ways of perceiving reality. Like, okay, what is reality and what is happening when we have these experiences? No, so although nowadays there seems to be a lot of communication between indigenous peoples and their practices and Westerners that go to the Amazon, for example, which is probably the most common destination, for these kind of travels. Although there's a lot of communication, I don't know if you really understand what their practices are and the importance that they have for them. And also we're having an impact on the way that they practice. If all of a sudden becoming a healer is a successful business, because Westerners come and they are willing to pay thousands of euros or dollars for a week of experience, that starts shaping the shamanic practices in a different way. This is something that's natural. Shamanic practices have always been evolving. It's not like a static sort of practice. They adapt rapidly to the changing environment. But I think that we need to be aware that we are changing those practices by us being a big part of that. And then we have, on the other pole of the spectrum, we have Western science, in which we talk about molecules that would have certain effects on certain receptors of the brain, and therefore have certain impact on depression or whatever. How to reconcile these different views, if they need to be reconciled, which I don't know. I think that there's room for everything. I think that the Western medicine has also a tradition, starting with psychoanalysis and these deep analytical schools of understanding the unconscious. We can go even back to the Greeks and their mysteries of Eleusis. So there's some sort of Western tradition in going into our souls and navigating there and trying to gain healing and knowledge. So maybe there doesn't need to be so much a communication in terms of practices between shamanic practices and Western practices. I do think that there needs to be certain reciprocity, in the sense that we white people are going to these indigenous peoples, and somehow we are extracting some of their resources, be it the plants or be it the wisdom and the knowledge that they have. And then we start creating retreat centers here in the West, using those lines of knowledge and using their even physical appearance, or the clothing and all that. And I think that there needs to be certain reciprocity to protect those practices and to make sure that they can continue doing their own thing, as we are doing our thing in the West, that they can continue doing their own thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think there definitely needs to be a great deal of respect for these ancient traditions. Like I said, they've been practicing these things for thousands of years. There was a lot there that you touched on. There was a couple of different things I wanted to pick up on. One of them, I guess, is like, they are very different cultures. And I wonder about, obviously there's, like you said, there's a rise in, loads of different retreat centers that you can go to, and it's all very, fancy Western, paying thousands of dollars or euros for these experiences. But you touched on something important there. I think the difference kind of in consciousness and mindset, and why there might not even be a concept of integration in the indigenous worldview versus the Western. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is, we kind of bring these traditions over, and then we're trying to apply them to the Western psyche, the Western mind. And then, but obviously we don't grow up in those same traditions. So there kind of does need to be a different way of managing it, because it's one thing to do ayahuasca or whatever in the Amazon, but then it's a completely different thing to, you know, go back to your 9 to 5 on Monday and try to process that. So I wonder, what is the role of integration then in that sense, and what is the duty of care among people that are practicing with these medicines?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I usually talk about this when I refer to the different dimensions of integration that you can find in the book. When I talk about the social dimension of integration, it's precisely that. No? In shamanic cultures, in indigenous peoples, they have already the integration practices that are ingrained in their worldview. So they don't see integration as something separate from the experience. No? If you're having a certain treatment with a curandero, they prescribe you certain plants, also certain food restrictions, sexual restriction for a certain amount of time. So there's all sorts of behavioral prescriptions of things that you have to do before the experience and after the experience. Yeah, they will not talk about integration or preparation, but there are already some practices that are happening there. Yeah. The thing is that they don't have to do this intellectual work in defining that, because it's already done. It's part of their culture. So if you're taking ayahuasca, and that's something that it's very visible when you go to Peru, for example. No, you go to Cusco or to Pucallpa or to Iquitos, and then on the restaurants, like regular restaurants, in a lot of places you can find that in the menu there's a ayahuasca menu or ayahuasca diet, no, or San Pedro diet. No, that means that they know which foods are supposed to be eaten after your experience. No? So you go to the restaurant, you can ask for this and no questions asked. No, but here, if you go out of a diet and come back to your 9 to 5 job, and then you cannot drink coffee or you cannot do this and that, this is going to raise all sorts of questions. No? So in the same way that they have these practices already ingrained in the way of doing things, they also have the understanding of what happens when you go through these experiences. Therefore, there's not a need to explain, there's not a need to create a new language to talk about that. But as in the West, we have not been paying attention to these kind of experiences. Now that a larger amount of people are having them, there's the need to create a common language so people can go back to their 9 to 5 jobs and their daily lives, and somehow find a way to make those experiences coherent with our reality, with our worldview. No? And that is not so easy, because psychedelics can induce experiences that go quite beyond the ordinary. No? So many times they shake the basic foundations of how we understand ourselves or how we understand reality. And then comes this need, like, what do I do with this? Yeah, because somehow this does not belong to my ordinary reality. Yeah, and then we need to do this extra layer of integration and try to find practices that will help us in being able to translate those experiences. I think that in that regard, looking at these native peoples that have been using these experiences for a long time and seeing how they have integrated them in their society can give us a hint of what would be needed in our society to make these experiences easier to integrate. Yeah. So if from a social perspective, we can include these realities as well, we can find a common language, a common structure to hold them socially, then the need for specific integration is going to be reduced, because those experiences are going to be part of our reality again. You know, so I think that on the wide sense, integration should go into this direction, into a more kind of social level of integrating these experiences back into our culture.
Agreed, totally. I wanted to ask you as well about, let's just say, for individual practitioners that are working with altered states and psychedelics, etc., in a more, I suppose, in a more ceremonial context, which I think is really good. It's really important, and I haven't taken part in any clinical trials. Most of my experience has either just been myself or in a ceremonial context. But one thing I have observed over the last few years in different scenarios is while there is an effort to preserve, the wisdom and try to bring over these different practices, I'm not so sure that there is enough on the side of a duty of care in terms of trauma, because these things obviously can bring up all sorts of past memories, and it can be very difficult to know, how do you actually, deal with that once you've opened Pandora's box. So I guess what I'm asking is, what is the duty of care among those practitioners? Like, do you think it's necessary to have, some background, at least in trauma training? Or what kind of specific frameworks would you recommend, or that you use in your practice?
That's an interesting question, and I'd like to start answering it like going one step before that. Yeah, in many traditional societies that used ayahuasca, for example, ayahuasca was not something to be used by the client, by the person seeking healing. Yeah, so the sick person would go to the shaman, the curandero, and the curandero maybe would prescribe certain plants that would be not ayahuasca, and he himself or she herself would drink ayahuasca, the curandero, no? And go through the experience, purge maybe the other people's dark energies or sickness or something like that. So ayahuasca originally was not so much intended to be something taken by the client, at least not in all societies. Yeah, maybe in the Brazilian churches that appeared more recently, that's the way that it was, no? That everybody was participating in the experience. But in shamanic traditions, would be the shaman that would go into this non-ordinary state of consciousness, yeah, because it was understood that it might be not a pleasant experience. This kind of experiences can get heavy sometimes. So there might be a lot of difficult emotions to process, difficult physical sensations. No, so it was not considered something fun to drink ayahuasca. No, that's why the shaman would do that. Even the Shipibos and a lot of shamans, also mestizo shamans in Peru, they talk about how before, in order to drink ayahuasca, the apprentice would have gone already through some training. Yeah, they would have done certain dietas, and they would drink ayahuasca not right away. Yeah, there's even some practitioners today that they offer dietas to people, but they will ask you to do at least, I don't know, 10, 12, 14 dietas before you even start drinking ayahuasca with them. No, that's a whole commitment to that. We've radically changed this vision because we in the West understand that it's us, we need to go through the experience in order to produce the change. No, we don't believe so much in someone else doing things for us in that regard. No? So then you have this different paradigm in which in shamanic societies, Westerners go and they want to have the experience, and that's what happens. People, the shamans, they offer the experience to the Westerners. No? So I think that makes the question that you were raising, like, what about trauma? Well, I think that this is something maybe not new, but maybe not so old either. No, it's like more and more people that might have gone through traumatic events in their lives are being exposed to these experiences. So maybe the answer to this is not so much in certain shamanic practices, but more in the reality on our societies, not some therapeutic practices that need to be learned by the practitioners. No, because it's true that when you offer this experience to people, some of them will run into difficulties, no? And then it's a responsibility of the people who provide the experience to have enough people working with them, enough expertise, the appropriate space to be able to hold and support those experiences. Yeah, we have done with ICERS, this foundation that I've worked for some years. We've done workshops in which we've been meeting ayahuasca practitioners, Western ayahuasca practitioners in the UK, in the US, in Israel, in the Netherlands, in Portugal, in Spain. And we've done these workshops, these meetings in which we tried from our perspective to give them hints, give them ideas on how to increase safety of their practices. That those tips had more to do with preparation and integration, and not so much on how to conduct the experience itself, because we understand that there's different traditions, and if you learn with Colombian shamans, it's going to be different than if you learn with Peruvian shamans. So then what you do during the ceremony is going to be different. But there's elements before, like for the screening and the preparation, and then elements after on how to run sharing groups, how to support people in the long run, that they can be implemented by these people, and that can radically increase the safety of the work that they are offering. And that's been something that we've been focusing very much on the last years. And I have to say that it's usually very well received it's not so well received if you go and you tell these people what they have to do during the experience, or that a certain lineage is better than another lineage. But these things that are outside the experience, they are usually very well received.
That's good. I think that's really good to hear, it being such a booming field at the moment. I think it's important that the integration and the preparation is something that's given just as much attention as the experience itself. Another thing I wanted to ask you is I'm very interested in this concept of initiation or rites of passage that you'd see in the indigenous worldview. And I kind of have a sense that the psychedelic renaissance may be playing a part in a kind of a collective initiation that we're all going through with, any number of crises that you want to mention with what's going on in the world at the moment. What do you think about this concept of initiation and perhaps, I guess, the lack of initiation rituals, the fact that we've kind of lost that throughout time? What do you think about this idea of it being a collective initiation and the role of altered states in that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Until not so long ago, there were some initiation rites in every society. Yeah, somehow, because our society has been evolving, becoming more modern, science has found its way through, technology found its way through, and now we are a science and technology-based society. These rites have been less and less important. And they can be rites as simple and familiar as, I don't know, the baptism or the circumcision or marriage, certain things that were given for granted some years ago now start to be doubted. They don't seem so meaningful. People don't want to get married by the church. They don't want to baptize the kids because they have lost the meaning that they had. On the one hand, that's a good thing because we freed ourselves from some rigid structure from the past, but at the same time we've lost certain structure that was meant to give meaning throughout different moments in life, and somehow that oriented people in a certain way. And we humans need these kind of experiences. There seems to be moments in our personal evolution, in our psychological evolution as men and women throughout our life, in which we need to define stages. We need to clearly mark a transition. We need to be aware that time is passing, that we are growing, that we're stepping into a new role. And we have lost that, but the fact that we have lost that doesn't mean that we're not looking for that. And I think that's when psychedelic substances have had an amazing role throughout the years. I don't know if the psychedelic renaissance is now a specific moment in which this initiation is happening. Maybe yes, maybe a lot of people is going through this experience now, but I think that already in the 60s we saw some kind of this experience, in the United States with all this psychedelic revolution. That was some sort of an initiation. Yeah. If you think also about this psytrance and rave scene in which people create these huge festivals in nature, they take psychedelic substances for a weekend or for a week, and they dance together. That, I don't know, to my eyes, that looks like an attempt to create a structured and organized sort of ritual, in which the collective has an importance, doing it with people, not just on our own, and also the non-ordinary states of consciousness, they have an importance there. So somehow we are trying to recreate this rite of passage, and that's why I feel that particularly this psytrance scene, and I don't know, Boom Festival and these kind of festivals, they are in a way new or a modern rite of passage. Psychedelics have been labeled in many ways. You can label them as medicines, as drugs, or whatever. And we can think that they are potentially beneficial for depression, for PTSD. But what we are sure that psychedelics are catalysts of change. People that take psychedelics, most of the times you do not remain the same. That stirs something inside of us, and there's usually a before and after these kind of experiences. A lot of people feel that the initiation that they had was maybe when they were at Woodstock, or nowadays when they go to these kind of festivals, or they have a ceremony and they discover these non-ordinary realities. So psychedelics definitely are catalysts for change. Yeah, and I think that that's why one of the uses that we can find for them is creating meaningful experiences in which we feel there's a before and after, and somehow they work as rite of passage. That was already an idea that Aldous Huxley had, in his book Island. He talks about this utopian society in which they have this mushroom, this psychedelic mushroom that they use in the transition. They use it for many things, but they use it in the transition from teenage years into adulthood. And so that's already the idea that these substances could be used as some sort of rite of passage. And definitely, I feel that our society would be much healthier if we had certain rite of passage that would be collectively accepted. Who knows what the future is going to bring us in that regard.
I certainly hope there'll be a revival of ritual and rites of passage for sure. Like, I think we've been kind of contrasting a little bit between like the Western scientific view and indigenous and religious traditions throughout. And yeah, something that comes to mind is that because we evolved for so much of our time, doing ritualistic practices through religion and like you said, through using different types of altered states and psychedelics, it feels like that's something that's very much, a part of us. It's a part of who we are. It's a part of our consciousness. And it kind of seems like it's almost like when we dispensed with wisdom traditions and religion and everything and kind of locked ourselves into a more rational scientific worldview, it was almost like we threw the baby out with the bathwater. Like everything related to that, it all just seemed, like, oh, that's just silly superstition, or that's just this and that's just that. And then when these things don't really want to go away, we still have this urge to have a rite of passage. I feel like, for example, when I was, well, like many people when they're in their 20s or late teens or whatever, there's this kind of rebellious phase, or like, wanting to go out and just get fucked up with your friends on the weekend or something. It's almost like that seems to be coming from like a deep craving, like for something more, for some kind of ritualistic practice of getting out of your head for a change, and it almost feels like because we've lost that we're really, really craving to get back to that. But because we live in a kind of what Gabor Mate would call a toxic culture, it's like there's no healthy outlet for that, So this question is actually from Guy, our good friend and fellow psychonaut. So he asks, to what extent do you think we can escape our societal conditioning? And related to that, does the word awakening have any meaning in a psychedelic context?
Okay, to the first question, I really don't know what to answer. First of all, I don't know if I want to escape my societal, I don't know how you framed it, but I don't know if the change needs to come from the outside or the inside. I think that many times one of the challenges of the psychedelic experience is that they are so far out from ordinary experience, and then it's very difficult to find how they can come through into our daily lives, and how can we actually manifest some of that within the framework in which we live, and I find that challenge more interesting, or I feel more tuned in with that than like dropping out society completely, and becoming a yogi and going to the Himalayas and whatever, which I would escape some certain conditioning. But yeah, I don't know. I think that one of the things that psychedelics bring is the sense of accountability and responsibility. That in the end we are responsible and accountable for what we do, and that we have a choice, that we have freedom in choosing how we behave to other people, what kind of jobs we engage into, what do we do with our money, how do we consume. It's something that we do have freedom in that. But certainly psychedelics have the potential of allowing us to see things from a radically different perspective. So for a few hours, maybe we can completely escape the normal ways of perceiving things, and we can tune in other ways of understanding reality. Although it's a good question that remains. Is that really what's happening, or that's an illusion of what's happening? And that's this nice book by Ido Hartogson, an Israeli researcher, and he says that the psychedelic experience is also influenced by the social setting of the time. So it's not the same thing to trip now in 2022 that in 1960. Probably the general atmosphere, the general societal atmosphere that we have now and that was then, it has an impact on the kind of experiences that we have. He's done this research that the expected effects that the effects that we're expecting a substance to have will influence the outcome of the experience. So maybe if in the 60s there was this idea that these were substances that allowed you to, get enlightenment in the Eastern conception or have mystical experiences, maybe we would see more of that in those days. And nowadays that maybe we're more focused on psychological work and trauma work, maybe we'll see more of that. So who knows how flexible we really are. In the end, we are fishes swimming in water, but trying to explain what water looks like. So yeah, it's not so easy to know how much we can go away from our conditioning. Maybe people that become enlightened through psychedelics or through meditation or whatever, they would have a different take on this. But I have not had that experience of being enlightened. And regarding the enlightenment with psychedelics, I don't know if we can. I think that sometimes enlightenment is understood as a linear sort of process. You start climbing a mountain, and at some moment you reach the top, and that's the end of the story. I don't know if it's like that. Jack Kornfield has this beautiful book, After the Ecstasy, the Laundry, and a lot of people in his retreats have had what felt to be or what were enlightening experiences, but then they have to go back to the daily lives and continue with their daily lives. So what happens next? And I think that that's the endless question. What happens after enlightenment? What happens after an experience that we merge into cosmic love or whatever? Well, we will continue living. Maybe some Hindu teachers, they manage to live in this non-dual and enlightened state and operate from there. But I think that that's a minority of people. And definitely not me, so I cannot really relate to that experience.
Yeah, no, I feel you. I was just thinking as you were talking there about my experience with 5-MeO-DMT, Bufo Alvarez, and just when you said, what was the book called? After Ecstasy, then comes the Laundry. I thought that was great, but so I had this incredible enlightening experience, if you could call it that. Like you said, just like total non-dual, every perception of myself just like instantly dissolved. And then, it's impossible to put into words, but total oneness, total love, total disconnection. And then coming back into my body, I had this sensation almost like it was almost like I feel like that must be what it feels like to be born, like right before you're coming into the world and you're leaving this space and you don't really know what's ahead of you, but you just have this like lingering feeling of love as you come into the world, which was great, obviously. But then Monday I had to go back to work, and it's like, you can't even define it really. I remember just having this sensation of I couldn't take anything seriously. I couldn't take reality itself. Like I felt like I could just poke my finger through the table almost. I had this sense of this isn't real. And I think that's actually probably one of the only real proper examples I have of a total failed integration, because it was just such a big experience that I didn't know what to do with it when I came back, So I wonder, on that note, what can we do to help people with integrating a difficult psychedelic experience? Obviously, this one was a particularly positive one, but it felt almost impossible to integrate. But how can we help people that get into difficulty with psychedelics?
First thing that comes to mind when you talk about this positive experience with 5-MeO-DMT that was impossible to integrate or very difficult to integrate is that there are some experiences that I think that cannot be fully integrated. No, as long as we are individual, separated beings living in this ordinary three-dimensional reality, we cannot really integrate that experience that belongs to a different dimension. No? So I think that the best we can do is be inspired by that experience, and somehow that is a source of inspiration that will shape our behaviors for better. Yeah, but I don't think that we can fully integrate that, because that's something that doesn't belong to the reality that we usually operate in. No? So it's not going to be possible to fully bring that as separated and isolated individuals. No? The second thing is how to work with difficult experiences. And in that regard, I think that those experiences can be integrated for the most part. Yeah? And people run into challenges, and that's been my work for the last 10 years, to work with people that have had difficult experiences and find a way to support them through this journey in order to regain the control of their lives, no, or the feeling that they were in control of their minds, of their lives, and their bodies. Many times, people after a difficult psychedelic experience can be under these unexpected adverse effects. No, it can be in form of emotion or intrusive thought or anxiety, or all sorts of perceptual challenges. And how to work with these people, how to find a therapeutic practice that would actually help them in a short term to recover some sense of control, and therefore shift towards being able to use that experience for good, has been the intention of my practice. No, I think that when someone has had a difficult experience, the objective is to reduce the symptoms and the anxiety and the difficulties, so they can look at this experience in a new light and say, all right, this was challenging, this was difficult, but I can take something good out of that. Yeah, I can grow, I can learn, I can find some deeper and wider meaning on that experience. And then that's been my obsession, could I say, no, for the last 10 years, to find ways of, okay, people are having difficult experiences, they are finding some specific challenges. How can we support these people? Yeah, and the first step that I took was to try to understand what were the main difficulties that people were having, or how were they phrasing these difficulties. Yeah, and because I was working at this integration service at iSeries that actually I created, co-created with the founder of iSeries, and I ran it for a lot of years. I could have direct experience with hundreds and thousands of people, no, that had challenging psychedelic experiences, and that gave me well, I tried to organize that experience to create some sort of cartography, some sort of map of the more common difficult reactions that people have afterwards. And then the work was how to create a therapeutic intervention that would make sense, that would be aligned with the values of psychedelic therapy, and that would be effective with supporting people in a short term. Yeah, and that's what the book is about, and that's what half of the book describes. No? The second part of the book is more oriented for this kind of therapeutic interventions that clinicians can use for supporting people in that situation.
One other thing I wanted to pick your brain about is the idea of evolution alongside psychedelics. So obviously Terence McKenna had this theory about, stoned ape theory, and that basically that our massive leap in human consciousness, however many hundreds of thousands of years ago, may have been due to a cooperation alongside psilocybin mushrooms. And I remember about a year ago, I was in a mushroom ceremony in my friend's place, and I had this really nice, like heartwarming, like heart opening experience. And it felt like almost like a communication between me and the plant. I felt like I was getting this, wisdom download. And what it was kind of saying to me is like, well, we're here and we're reaching out to you now, like to humanity. It's like to try to cooperate with you because you've lost wisdom, and we still, like as plants, have that wisdom, and we want to share that with you. And it made me think then later, I was like, maybe this resurgence of psychedelics and interest in altered states might have something to do with actually the plants reaching out to us, trying to cooperate. And I think they call it mutualism, when two different species work together for a common goal. I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on that, on evolution and psychedelics?
it's really exciting, and my knowledge doesn't go so much into that direction. So everything that I share with you will be mere speculation and personal thoughts, no?
No, speculate.
On the one hand, I find it really amazing, and it shocks me, and I get in awe when I think that there are mushrooms, or there are plants that exist from millions of years before the humans were, or any sort of mammal was there, that they already had these compounds that had the potential of being psychedelic, when some species that would come many years later would try them, no? So for me, it's difficult to understand how all this happened, no? And it's somehow something that makes me think about the magic that permeates creation, no? And the how limited knowledge we have about how things work, really, no? And I don't know. So I am not the person that would believe that there's an intentionality in what plants are doing or what humans are doing. I think that I'm more a person that likes to observe and describe what I see, no? And definitely there is a relationship between these plants and humans, and that relationship has been going on for many years, no? The first depiction of mushroom use are hundreds of years old, if not thousands. Peyote and San Pedro. San Pedro has been used for more than, I don't know, 10,000 years. So there's a long tradition, a long relationship between these mind-altering substances and humans, no? And it seems that now it's getting more and more. So I don't know, for whatever reason, it's true. It's two species or several species that are relating more to each other at the moment, no? There seems to be a more exchange of communication. Humans are growing mushrooms. Mushrooms are influencing people in the way that they think about psychology, therapy, science, technology, you know? So yeah, there's a communication there. If that is evolution in the intentional sense, I don't know, I wouldn't go that far, no? But definitely it's something that it's happening. Our reality is being shaped by the experience that these substances induce, you know? So there's clearly a relationship there, no? Yeah, I find that fascinating, really. I had recently a conversation with someone that had a client of mine, no? He had an experience he created himself his own ritual, he did his thing, no? And he had this amazing experience in which he connected with some sort of outer intelligence, outer being that was taking care of everything, no? And it was difficult for him to answer if that was me, or that was something larger than me, or that was a part of, or I am a part of that, no? But there seemed to be an intelligence, seemed to be a plan, no? To take care of things and to do things in a certain way. But I don't know really how to answer your question. I think that escapes my knowledge and intelligence. But yeah, we're being part of that, so we cannot escape evolution. I think that we're doing what we are supposed to be doing. No? In the end, we have been here for a very short time, no? And technological society for even a shorter time. No? So definitely there's a bigger, larger plan than what we can foresee and understand. No?
That was some very good speculating. I really liked that. And no, I totally agree. I think it's kind of, you know, because we obviously live in relationship to our environment. It's not just, you know, us against the world. We are a part of the world and a part of the whole biosphere and ecosystem. So yeah, I guess like things like that really do give me hope for the future. So I think we're coming up on time now. So is there anything else that you would like to share before we wrap it up for today, or maybe tell people where they can find you as well?
Well, people can find me on Instagram. They Google for Marc Aixalà, I'm there. Also on Facebook. That's where I share a lot of, well, I'm not very active in social media, but yeah. And they can reach me at my website, marcaixalà.com. And I don't know, for wrapping comments, yeah, I think that we are seeing an unprecedented moment in the use of psychedelics. You know, it has gone beyond anyone's expectations that even 5 years ago people could have. You know, if you think that 10, 15 years ago we were talking about illegal substances that they had no therapeutic use, and society was completely against that. Now we are in a completely different moment. No, the MDMA, psilocybin are going to be legalized pretty soon. Ketamine is something that's being used daily in ketamine clinics. There's hundreds and thousands of retreat centers doing many different things. And there's hundreds and thousands of psychedelic therapists underground doing their thing as well. No? So we're seeing a huge increase in the use of these substances, in the exposure to these substances. And I think that with this, it also comes responsibility, and this is a collective responsibility. Yeah, not only on the legal aspect, because we know, no, that if we don't do things right, regulation might backfire, no, and we can go to a more, again, to dark ages in which the substance cannot be used. So that's one thing, but I think that we have a collective responsibility in creating safer practices, in creating safer societies, safer communities, no, in which these experiences can be held and supported in the appropriate way. Psychedelics are tools. They are not the panacea. They are not the holy grail. They are not a magic bullet, even if we want them to be that. Yeah, but they are not. They are tools. They are really complex, really rich tools that can be used in many different ways. But it's our responsibility how we use them, how we consume them, how we approach these practices. Yeah, so I hope that talking about this social integration, we increase and we raise our knowledge and also our responsibility in acting in a compassionate and human way. No, yeah, maybe this is utopian, but I don't think psychedelics are going to bring this revolution, and this they are not going to save the planet. It's people after the experiences that will have to decide, what do I want to do with this that has happened? No, and that's where our power and our freedom, I think, that really begins. So I hope that at least psychedelics can have a little bit of impact on how we approach other people and how we live our lives more responsibly. So yeah, that'd be it.
I hope so too. Thanks so much for that. That was really beautiful. And thanks so much for the very interesting, fun conversation. And yeah, talk soon.
Thank you so much, Jimmer. A pleasure to talk with you.